competitive, you have to devalue. That means, currency board kind of limits your monetary policy. If you're going to back everything by US dollar, you give up your monetary policy. You cannot issue new money. I'm not talking about paper money, money in the general sense. If you think about the banking system, roughly speaking, if the reserve requirements are 10%, which means anytime somebody makes a deposit of $100, banks have to keep $10 as reserves. That thing is lent, and it comes back to the banking system as deposits. And if you do this ad infinitum, that actually creates $1,000 of money. The money that could be created is 1 over the reserve ratio. So it's not just uh, paper money. This so-called conventional peg. The country formally pegs its currency at a fixed rate to another currency. Uh, among examples, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco are these. They say, without necessarily worrying about backing the currency by dollars, we're fixing our exchange rate at 375. Of course, if you would have had to, if normal circumstances would have required devaluation, but you're fixed, that's going to create inflation. So, in a real sense, in an inflation adjusted sense, your currency is going to lose value, but these are not necessarily that desirable unless you know that you're not going to have much current account issues. Some sort of stabilized arrangement. It's almost like a conventional peg, but you say, I'm going to be within plus or minus certain percent of that for a certain period of time. Uh, Indonesia, Singapore, and Lebanon was like that. The so-called crawling peg. Uh, it's similar to peg or similar to conventional peg or stabilized arrangement, but they kind of change the peg using certain factors. For example, inflation. In 1990s and the first half of '80s or 2000s, Turkey was like that. The central bank pretty much allowed, to the extent they could, the exchange rate only to change by inflation amount. Basically, the crawl was moving upwards, the peg was moving upwards, but they, in a sense, had a peg on the real exchange rate. Again, crawl-like arrangements, a crawling peg with a band around it. China is actually doing something like that. And similar ideas. Uh, and typically floating, uh, large market determined. The free floating, nobody actually does anything, but sometimes central banks intervene when there are undesirable moves. Interventions of central banks were a lot more powerful in '80s and '90s, but now the size of the FX market is so big, any effects a central bank, even as big as Fed, may have is short-lived. Back in early '90s, if Fed came in and bought 100 billion euros, I mean, that made a big effect on the market. Now 100 billion euros is nothing. And the daily trading volume in FX markets is over $3 trillion. It's that big. Now, certain countries had somewhat different arrangements. One of them was the European monetary system. This was the system they had before Euro. They recognized that, okay, having stability of the exchange rates is economically beneficial. You don't have, if most of your trades, you're a French company, most of your trade is within EU, and it kind of makes sense because, among other things, EU is also a customs union, which means export and imports of goods and services are free from any taxation, any tariffs. But if you import stuff from US, depending upon what you're importing, you may have to pay some tariff, or China for that matter. And those things have a cost. And for example, Trump did and wants to do even more tariffs to Chinese. He views that as income. The trouble is, tariffs are always indirect taxes on your own consumers. I'm a Chinese company. I export stuff to US, and they impose a 50% tariff, which means when I sell something for $100, they're going to charge me $50, right? Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to start selling that at $200 so that I can pay the $100 to US government. Well, then suddenly the price of that in US went from $100 to $200. So consumers are actually paying for that. So in order not to have costs like that, plus stability of the exchange rate, monetary stability, have sizable benefits, they said, okay, let's coordinate our own exchange rate policies, but within our borders, let's have, for example, a currency unit. This was kind of a fictional unit. It was a basket of currencies. I don't know, $40, 40 pounds, 100 Deutschmarks, this many Spanish pesetas, this many Portuguese escudos, this many Italian lira. These are the old currencies, in case you never heard of them. They had not existed since 2003, I think. I mean, euro started in 99, but the actual paper currencies continued until 2003, or the Greek drachma, whatever you have. But there is also exchange rate mechanism. Not everybody adopted that, but it basically said, oh, that's euro. Let's go back to page up. ERM. It basically set the bilateral exchange rates between the countries in the ERM system within a very narrow band. So, for example, uh, British pound versus Deutschmark. There was a target rate, and there was a plus or minus 1% band. Anytime the exchange rates wanted to go above 1% of the center of the band, you sold pounds and bought Deutschmarks. Similarly, if it wanted to go below, you did the reverse, as long as you could. This worked somewhat fine until uh, early 90s. Britain was kind of in trouble, you know, among other reasons. Uh, the British economy was not performing very well. Normally, when your economy is not doing that well, if you're a country that has control of its own monetary policy, you ease off on the monetary policy. For example, right now interest rates are high. There are some kind of signs that economic growth is somewhat slowing, or the job creation is not as big as it used to be. The Fed is thinking, okay, let's reduce the interest rates, which all over reduces the borrowing cost. When your borrowing costs are lower, you're more willing to invest. People are more willing to borrow. You know, I don't have the down payment now, but if I did, I would have bought a house and got a mortgage right now. I'm not going to pay 7%. Back in 2021, uh, my ex bought a place in La Jolla, California, which is basically the rich part of San Diego, where UC San Diego is, because she wanted to move there after my younger son went to college. We got a mortgage for 2.87. Okay, she's paying, including taxes and insurance, about $2,700 on that. It was a $450,000 loan. Had she bought that house right now at the same price, the mortgage payment would have been, including taxes and stuff, over 4,500. There is no way she could afford that. 'Cause right now, if she's renting her place in Lexington, uh, it's a big house. The rent over there pays all of that plus some income for her. If she had bought it now, there is no way that could have happened. That means if mortgage rates go back to 3% or 4%, if I can get away with the down payment somehow, I'd go to my landlord and say, I want to buy this house because I like my house, among other reasons. It is literally 0.55 miles from here. I walk here in 10 minutes at a slow pace.